Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Election Watch. Look, we've had another extraordinary poll just come out in the last couple of days. Although I suppose it's not really extraordinary anymore. This is just the new political reality in which we live in the UK, and that is that Reform are taking the two-party consensus and smashing it. That two-party consensus that's existed in the UK for pretty much a century. The Reform Party currently are absolutely taking it to task. And we'll get straight into this. Look, a little bit of a different view for you on the screen. You're used to looking at Election Maps UK's website, but we're not on there today. We're on More in Common's website. This is the pollster who conducted this poll that just came out. 11,000 participants. It's an MRP poll, so they proved quite accurate before the general election in July, and so this is their website. So a little bit of a different layout today, but and we'll look at some of the differences between this poll and the current nowcast as well. Although there is a lot of broad similarities as well. So I'll get straight into this. So this is just a diagram of how the Parliament would look after this, if this poll were to be a general election result. We'll start with Labour, and we see Labour on down to 228 seats. That's down 184 from 412 that they won just 6 or 7 months ago in July. Again, I say extraordinary, but this is what we've seen with the polling averages. This is an extraordinary fall in support, fall in projected seats for a governing party so early in their term of government, and hugely damaging. And Labour have got a huge amount of work to do to build themselves back up to the 326 that they would require to form a majority government again. Now, of course, there is a lot of time between now and then, but it implies there's a lot of work for them to do. There's a lot for them to turn around if they are to win the next election, whenever that may be. The Conservatives would be the main beneficiaries. They improve up to 222. However, as the poll notes, it's still a very low share of the vote for the Conservatives. I think they end up on about 25%, 26% maybe of the vote. That's the implied vote share based off the number of seats they get. The Liberal Democrats would be down to 58. I can't remember what they got 72 in July. So they've lost 15 or 14 seats. But of course, the main story is Reform, who would improve up from 5 at the moment all the way up to 72 seats in the House of Commons. And look, you may say, well, how can you say they're smashing through the two-party system when they've got, in this result here, a similar number of seats to, the exact same number of seats as what the Liberal Democrats currently have. And I'm going to talk about that. We'll see that a bit later on as to why I think that's the case. But look, this is, I'm going to use the word again, it is extraordinary for a party so young and so new in British politics to have this impact so early. And of course, this isn't a general election, this is just an opinion poll, and it really counts for nothing unless they could actually do this in a real election. And of course, we're going to see if they have the potential to do that at the local elections in May. If they can have a really good night there, then this becoming reality becomes a lot more of a realistic prospect. Of course, the other big winners would be the SNP, who would improve by 28 seats up to 37. You know, they're really benefiting from Labour's drop in support across the country as well. Up in Scotland, and they get back up to nearly 40 seats. Interestingly, I think it's only the SNP who would make any gains in Scotland. No gains for the Conservatives in Scotland, if I remember rightly. But that's what we're going to go and have a look at next, actually, is the map of the constituencies that are, according to this poll, going to change hands. So here it is. This is as you can see at the top there, 198 seats that are projected to swing one way or another in this, if this were to be an election result. And as you can see, like I said, in Scotland, it's purely the SNP gaining off of Labour. And we'll have a quick glance at Scotland a bit later, but I want to zoom in firstly just in this area of England. Look, we've spoken about this a lot on the channel. If you've been watching the channel for a few weeks, you will have become very familiar with this part of the country, sort of Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and the North East. We're going to just whiz through these a little bit because there is a lot of consensus actually between what we've seen in the nowcast and what we're seeing in this poll. But there is also some interesting differences to note as well. And again, if you've watched the channel, you'll know a number of Labour cabinet ministers, secretaries of state, who are very much at risk of losing their seats to Reform. So we'll start, look, Pontefract, Castleford and Nottingley. This is Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, she is, according to this poll, going to lose her seat to Reform. Moving away through, look, you can see this glut of constituencies here in sort of South Yorkshire, moving into Lincolnshire and North Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, of just solid Reform support at the moment, according to this poll. Another interesting one is Royal Marsh and Conisbrough Defence Secretary John Healey set to lose his seat to Reform. He's another one we've been speaking about a lot in the channel. Rotherham, that's Sarah Champion. I don't think she's a minister at the moment. She may well be, but she's been a Labour MP for a long time. Look, Rother Valley as we move away down there. Bassett Law, Bolsover going to Reform according to this poll. Mansfield as well into Nottinghamshire. So look, that's a few more. We haven't seen those in the Nowcast, those ones. Reform are doing well in the Nowcast in those constituencies, but we've not seen the Nowcast actually give Reform those constituencies just yet. Moving our way into, in fact, there's one more around here we'll look at, which is this one, Doncaster North. Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary. This is another one that's not been on the radar on the Nowcast. Again, I think Reform are doing quite well in the Nowcast, but they've never been ahead here or as close as they were in the other ones. But this poll says that Ed Miliband would lose his seat to Reform in Doncaster North, which is, it's extraordinary. That's just 3 cabinet ministers just in that fairly small geographic area that are up at risk at the moment. Of course, the Nowcast does have Reform winning Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes. This agrees. Same with Kingston upon Hull East, but this poll also gives them Kingston upon Hull West. So doing well as we move across to the east coast there too. I think most of this we've Barnsley South, we've seen that in the Nowcast. None of this is all that surprising if you're following the channel. These are areas where Reform have been within 5% of the incumbent Labour MP, and Barnsley North similar. All around Leeds South West and Morley is another one that's not been on the Nowcast, but this poll's giving it to Reform. Spen Valley has been on our radar. Bradford South has been on the Nowcast. Halifax going to Reform, another one where they were close behind. Of course, it'd be remiss not to mention Ashton-under-Lyne. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, we've spoken about her a lot too, will lose her seat to Reform at the moment. Stalybridge and Hyde, Oldham East, Oldham West, Hayward and Middleton North. We've seen Makerfield on the Nowcast as well. Lee and Atherton's going to Reform. Bolton South, Bolton North East, Burnley is also on the Nowcast too. So look, just Reform doing extraordinarily well in these areas we've been talking about in the Nowcast, and this is where they're making huge inroads against Labour, and these are areas, remember, where the Conservatives previously haven't, even when Boris Johnson did very well in 2019, he didn't win a lot of these constituencies. Some of them he did, but certainly, Pontefract, I think Royal Marsh and Conisbrough, Doncaster North, like these were not constituencies that the Tories won in 2019. This is a uniquely, or Reform are having a unique impact on Labour here that the Tories never really have. Up into the northeast, you can see just this corner of the northeast has become a little Reform haven of support too. Houghton and Sunderland South, again, it'll be a familiar name if you follow the channel. The Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, this is her constituency, set to lose to Sunderland South, and then a number of these we've seen. North Durham is on the Nowcast going to Reform, Hartlepool going to Reform, Stockton North, Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor. Interestingly, Bishop Auckland's going to the Conservatives. The Reform are very close behind in this constituency in the Nowcast, but also Sunderland Central, South Shields, Jarrow and Gateshead East, Washington and Gateshead South, and Blythe and Ashington. Look, you just see how well Reform are doing up here, and we don't see it in this necessarily in this map. We may see it a bit later, but Reform are doing very well in the other constituencies here where they're not winning too. Moving down south, the Reform's gains become a bit more sporadic. We've seen on the Nowcast Dudley and Tipton and Wednesbury. Interestingly, this poll has Walsall going to the Conservatives, and same for North Warwickshire and Bedworth. Those two on the Nowcast are going to Reform, but on here it's going to the Tories, and that's understandable. Both of those are very close on the polling, and if you remember in a video I did recently, I said these more red wall areas, the Midlands, the East Midlands, West Midlands, the Conservatives are still polling quite well, and I said in the Nowcast expect to see them maybe flip-flopping between the Conservatives and Reform, because they are very close there. Interestingly, I'll come to Kent first. Actually, Kent. And Essex. So not too much inroads actually for reform in Essex. They will get Thurrock according to this, and they will get Dagenham and Rainham just in the very east of London, and into Kent they'll get Folkestone and Hythe and East Thanet. So those are ones that kind of match up with the Nowcast. It doesn't necessarily give them on the Nowcast, but they are either ahead in the Nowcast or slightly behind. But interestingly, one I hadn't had on my radar at all is Weston-super-Mare. I don't know if I've just missed this on the Nowcast, but that one's not caught my eye before. This poll has Reform gaining that from Labour, so a bit of joy for Reform in the southwest, and it also, according to this, get Plymouth Moorview as well. So just two there that I've not really spoken about very much in the Nowcast videos because I've been looking so much at the north. And of course, we know Llanelli going to Reform. That's been on the Nowcast for a while now. This also has them having. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this name, and my Welsh viewers are going to be angry with me. But I'm just going to call it Aberfan because I think that is how you pronounce that bit. I'm not going to try the second part. I do apologise. But that's going to Reform from Labour anyway, and Rhondda and Ogmore also going to Reform. So look, just an incredible set of results for Reform if this were to manifest itself. Of course, they have even grander ambitions. They want to win the next election outright, not just get 70 odd seats. And, you know, in all fairness to them, if this is where they're at now, one could say they're actually well on the way to achieving that, but they've obviously got a lot of work to do before then. But look, it's not just them who have done well, of course. The Conservatives, you can see there's a lot of blue on this map as well. And the Conservatives, although it would still be a pretty poor result for them. Only, I think what do we say, 222 seats. You know, that's a long way off forming a government, but it's some sort of recovery for them. And we can see, look, they've won back all these large rural constituencies up in Northumberland. They've got all these back from Labour. Into the Red Wall, you can see they've overturned a lot of Labour's gains over them there. Derbyshire Dales, South Derbyshire, Northwest Leicestershire, Loughborough, Lichfield. But again, of course, all these, like Tamworth, we know, we've spoken already, North Warwickshire and Bedworth, Nuneaton, Rugby. We know the Conservatives are ahead there at the moment, but we also know Reform are very close behind them there. So although the currently going to Conservatives, these are very much up for grabs for Reform. You can see them making some gains in their heartland areas again, ones that they should have won or should be winning anyway. You know, Southwest Norfolk, Liz Truss's old constituency. Actually, the Nowcast currently has this going to Reform. This poll has it going back to the Conservatives. Bury St Edmunds, Waveney Valley, they're going to get that off the Greens. The Greens have a pretty poor election, actually. They're currently on 4, I think, MPs, 4 or 5, but they'll be back down to 2 again. Based off of this poll. South Norfolk going Conservative as well. So you can see them making gains in the areas where, you know, they would be hoping to win. I think what the Conservatives would be particularly happy about from this poll is that they're actually making some inroads against the Liberal Democrats in their heartland. So, for example, they'll get Dorking and Hawley back off the Lib Dems. They would get Horsham back off the Lib Dems. Epsom and Ewell as well. Surrey Heath. Down here, Eastleigh getting that back off the Lib Dems. Newton Abbot down in the southwest back off the Lib Dems. So just starting to make some inroads in the south and the southwest against the Liberal Democrats where they got hammered by them. And I think they'll be particularly encouraged to see that coming up to the local elections. Like, you know, I've said, I think just going purely off the general election result, there's a chance that the Liberal Democrats could do very well in Surrey Council, in the Sussex councils, East and West Sussex, because they did so well against the Conservatives there in the general election. But seeing, you know, Conservatives, seeing them getting ahead of the Lib Dems in these heartland areas, you know, these are areas that the Tories should be winning, but they have gone a lot more Lib Dem recently in recent years, and yeah, I think this will be heartening news for them to see that they're nudging ahead of the Lib Dems again, and perhaps that's a bit of a good news story leading up to the May local elections. So I did say we'll quickly mention Scotland. That you can see it's a yellow story up in Scotland. As I said, it's all SNP gains off of Labour. In fact, that one's even a gain off Conservatives for the SNP. So the SNP enjoying a bit of a revival up in Scotland. But there's an interesting story with Scotland as well, which we'll look at in a moment, which is the next map we're going to go and look at, which is really the reason why I said Reform currently is smashing through that two-party consensus. So this map is fascinating, and this is, as you can see the title at the top there, this is where Reform are in first or second place. Now, there's no margin cut off, it's just seats where they are in first or second place. So if they could be second by however many percent, or they could be second. Could be second by 15%, or they could be second by 0.5%, for example. But these are all the constituencies where they are in first or second place. And I said earlier, well, how can I say Reform are smashing through the two-party consensus if they're only projected to win 70 odd seats, which is in fact exactly the same amount of seats as the Lib Dems currently have? Well, the reason is because the Lib Dems are not second in 200 constituencies. Reform, according to this poll, are obviously first in 72, and they're second in about 206, I think is the number. That's extraordinary. And if they can turn, even half of those second place finishes into first place finishes, they would be having a much better result than the Liberal Democrats have ever had. And so that's why I say Reform are absolutely taking the two-party system to task at the moment. So like I mentioned earlier, look, let's just zoom in on the northeast. We've seen those, the darker areas are where they're winning. We've already looked at those, but look, that whole area of the northeast, they're in second if they're not leading already. Tynemouth, Cramlington, Gateshead, Newcastle upon Tyne, even in the city they're second. Blaydon. Again, look, we don't know the margins. This is why the nowcast map is a bit better in my opinion, and that's why I like using it, because it gives you the breakdown of how far behind they are. But look, just interesting to see that Reform are the opposition in these areas. Bishop Auckland, I said they're close behind in Bishop Auckland. Richmond and North Allerton, Scarborough, Redcar, look, all these areas. Middlesbrough and Thornbury East, Stockton West. You can see this whole glut, this whole area. If they were all to turn Reform, you'd have pretty much a solid Reform coloured part of the map that would stretch all the way from, well, let's say Blyth, and it would go all the way down. You could draw a line of unbroken constituencies all the way down to the south coast if Reform were to take a number of these and actually convert those second places into first places, and that's extraordinary. Moving over again into the Greater Manchester area, you can see all these constituencies, in Manchester Central even, they're second place, and I'm sure they're probably quite a long way behind there, but still, second place there. Worsley and Eccles, Warrington North, in fact Worsley and Eccles, they're quite close behind if I remember from the nowcast. Into Liverpool, Liverpool West Derby, Liverpool Walton, Bootle, Knowsley, St Helens. We had, remember, Reform won a local by-election in St Helens North, in the constituency of St Helens North for St Helens Council recently, and that shocked everyone. This is a very, very Labour part of the country, and Reform currently are providing the opposition to Labour in this part of the country too. Just extraordinary, not gains for them, but it is gains, I suppose. They've come from nothing to challenge Labour in these heartland areas, and you can see through the Red Wall areas, we've mentioned Tamworth, where they're close behind. North Warwickshire and Bedworth, of course, they're ahead in the nowcast, but moving across eastwards, Mid Leicestershire, Melton and Syston, across, and of course now, look, if we come down into Essex, you can see where the Conservatives are going to be put under pressure by Reform if they keep surging in the way they have. You can see pretty much the entirety of Essex. Reform are in second place. They're second in Southend, they're second in Malden, second in Brentwood, second in Witham, Braintree, that's Suffolk, Harwich and North Essex. This whole area, you can see it. It's entirely Reform in second place, pressuring the Conservatives. And that's, I suppose, the momentum, the way it's gone since the general election, because obviously Labour are now in government, they're the incumbent party, all focus kind of becomes on them, and of course their poll numbers have dropped, and Reform's gains have actually all been, since then, at the expense of Labour. And actually we've not seen Reform really making too many inroads against Conservatives since the general election. Of course, they're going to have to do that if they want to form the next government, which is, of course, their stated ambition. So they're going to have to turn these, or make these constituencies in places like Essex and Suffolk and Norfolk and Kent, they've got to make them close races like they've managed to do in Yorkshire, Greater Manchester and the North East. And that may well be a challenge. They're trying to go after, it's this coalition of voters that's very difficult to build, where you're trying to pluck Conservative voters and Labour voters, and it'll be interesting to see just how well they do it. But look, as we move through south, it's interesting. Through the south, sorry, it's interesting that they're even second in Bexhill, Battle, Sussex, Weald. Second, as we come down to the southwest, they're doing quite well in Devon. Look, Exmouth, they're second. Exeter itself, they're second behind Labour. Central Devon, Torridge and Tavistock. Southwest Devon, they're obviously winning Plymouth Moorview, second in Plymouth Sutton. you know, there's no real area of the country. I suppose this area, sort of Oxfordshire, essentially Oxfordshire into Gloucestershire, I suppose here, and maybe Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire sort of area in here. That's the only part of the country where there's no real reform footprint. And actually, interestingly, not much in Wales, according to this, because in the Nowcast, Reform are doing very well in Wales, certainly more in the south than this is suggesting, and I think a bit more in the north as well. So that area too. But yeah, you can see this as you look at England. There isn't really many areas at all where there is no reform footprint on the map, and that is extraordinary. And look, you've seen their membership figures have had a lot of publicity in the last few days. They just do have all of the momentum at the moment going into those local elections. The local elections are going to be very important, and going on from there, it'll be interesting to see if they can maintain the momentum, before any general election. It's going to be so fascinating to see. And what's also interesting, and I mentioned it earlier, we look at Scotland. Look, they're actually second in a number of Scotland constituencies too. They're doing very well here around Edinburgh. Livingston, Bathgate, Falkirk, Alloa, Dunfermline, Glenrose up in Aberdeen. They're second in both Aberdeen South and Aberdeen North, second in Moray West, and second even to the Liberal Democrats in Orkney and Shetland. Now, look, again, I don't know the margin there. We don't see that on this map. I don't know how far behind this poll would have them in those areas, but just interesting to see. And we've been saying, haven't we, in the by-election videos, in all the Scottish by-elections, Reform have been finishing a fairly comfortable third. Now, they've been a very long way behind the top two, which invariably have been Labour and the SNP. Generally, we've been seeing them both get sort of low 30s%, Reform on about 15%, but they've been a long way ahead of the Tories. So interesting to see they are having, according to this poll at least, some impact on the Scottish voter too. So look, I think, of course, the Tories, in terms of raw seat numbers, are the big winners out of this poll, but I just think you can see the huge impact that Reform is having on UK politics. And we haven't seen anything like this, certainly not in the modern era, and it's going to be so fascinating to see sort of where we go from here. Like I say, if they can maintain the momentum, then I think we truly are at an era-defining moment in British politics. And I plan on covering it all on this channel, of course. So if you've enjoyed the video, please do leave a like. Subscribe down in the bottom right corner. We've had a fantastic... This channel only started a few weeks ago. We got up to almost 6,000 subscribers. Of course, the next target has to be 10,000. If we can march on towards that, that'd be absolutely incredible. Thank you, everybody, for your support. Thank you for watching. And I will see you in the next video.